Good morning, everyone. Welcome to third Global Finance Conclave, to the 12th session of GFC. Uh, we have a very exciting panel for you today. The title of the session is The Dissonance Between Capital Markets and the Real Economy. And at the outset, I must say, I must apologize on behalf of Mr. M. Damodaran, who will not be able to join us today because of some medical emergency in the family. But I'm sure that Mr. Vikram Kothari, Mr. Nitesh Bansal, and I will have a valuable conversation for all of you. So let me introduce our panel member before we begin our conversation on the capital market and its dissonance with the real economy. So let me first of all introduce Mr. Kothari. Mr. Vikram Kothari is Managing Director of National Security Clearing Corporation Limited, which is at National Stock Exchange. Mr. Kothari in the past has worked with a variety of organizations, including JP Morgan, HSBC, and ICICI Bank. And Mr. Kothari is a CA, if I am not mistaken, and also he has an ICWA. And we also have Mr. Nitesh Bansal, who is the Global Head of Commodities Research with GHF Group. And he's also is Director of Academics for Futures First Academy. And Mr. Bansal in the past has worked with Future First Info Services Private Limited, where he was head of research. He was also a research analyst. And in the past, he was a derivative trader. Many of my students would like to have a longer conversation with Mr. Bansal because many of my students are fascinated by derivatives. Undergraduate students find it quite complicated, but I'm sure that we will find an opportunity for Mr. Bansal to speak to students separately. And Mr. Bansal is also a chartered accountant. My name is Anand Mishra, and I am Vice Dean of Jindal School of Banking and Finance. Before joining academia, I was also a banker, although it's been a long time since I left banking. And before we start any kind of conversation, I must add this disclaimer that whatever conversation that we are going to have today is for information purpose. It's for speaking about some of these salient features of our economy and the capital market. You should not construe any of our conversation or any material as if that we are giving any kind of tax or investment or financial advice. Nothing that we are talking about is basically is a solicitation of any kind of thing. It's not a recommendation. It's not an endorsement. So with that in mind, we should start this conversation. So as the topic today for us is the dissonance between capital markets and the real economy. In fact, recently RBI issued some sort of warning or some sort of caveat to investors in its annual report that and talking about the meteoric rise in stock prices when the GDP of the country has contracted. And in fact, India's benchmark indices, Nifty, had more than doubled in the post-pandemic lows, which were roughly in March, April 2020. Several individual companies have seen multi-fold jump in their stock prices. And as I said, this even as the economy has headed south. And therefore, RBI mentions in the annual report, and I'm quoting from that report, it said something like this, the order of asset price inflation in the context of the estimated 8% or to 9% contraction in GDP poses the risk of a bubble. Now, not just in India, almost all global markets have seen a sharp rebound in their benchmark indices. So my first questions question to my panelists here is that, is it a bubble or is it a simple case of, let's say, overvaluation? Many, fund houses and many, expert investors have been saying that assets are slightly overvalued. So is it a bubble, or is it just a case of overvaluations? So Mr. Bansal, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Anand. Very good morning to all of you. Thank you for this interesting question. This is something which we always encounter whenever there is some kind of a near-term disconnect between the latest GDP release and the movement in the markets, because apparently markets movement can be tracked on a daily basis while economic activity cannot be. Before answering the question, I'll introduce something very interesting. I'm also myself a student of behavioral science, behavioral economics. And there's something very interesting that we indicate as part of behavioral economics that is known as a framing problem in psychology or in behavioral economics. Framing problem is basically about if you are looking for a certain answer and you frame your question in a certain way, then most certainly you will get that answer itself. So a lot of times what happens, especially for a layperson who is just getting is not at all interested or invested in markets himself or herself, what happens is that they read, and typically today people also get to read on social media, not just newspapers, and they end up reading what is being fed to them. So what happens is that if you only compare a certain movement in GDP with a certain movement in stock market, then markets will always be overvalued. You could always compare the very low movement in GDP or very slow growth in GDP with a very high movement in stock market anytime, and you will always find chances to indicate that there is either a bubble forming or there is something which is definitely disconnected. So that's one important point, which I think, at least for my answer, is a base. Now, when we compare the movements, let's say from post-demonetization 2016 till 2021, in the financial year 2021, we saw negative growth. But if you look at the movement of three important things, that is GDP, the IIP, the Index of Industrial Production, and the Nifty growth, just the growth in all three of them, for the successive quarters, first quarter of calendar year 2020, second quarter of 2020, and third quarter of 2020, then it is very easy to indicate, for example, the second quarter of 2020, wherein the IIP went down by 8%, GDP went down on a quarterly basis 30%, and Nifty went up by 20%. So if you look at all these three numbers, then they look hugely disconnected. 8% drop in IIP versus 30% drop in GDP and 20% growth in Nifty, all quarterly changes. But if you look at the same numbers on a quarterly average basis for first quarter, second quarter, third quarter of 2020, including the period right before pandemic, the major period of lockdowns, and then the period right after the lockdowns, then the quarterly average comes to close to 3% drop in all three of them. So what happens? That is what I mean by framing problem. What happens is that depending on what you're looking at, it appears somebody could indicate that market is disconnected. Somebody could also indicate that market is not disconnected in whatever is happening. Definitely having in the right, the movement is happening basically in the right direction. Now, that's just GDP and Nifty, Sensex with a very small period, as I said, first quarter till third quarter of 2020. If I look at broadly, then it is easy to say from 2016 to 2021, on an average, GDP grew by approximately 25%, 27%, whereas Sensex and Nifty as well from that period has doubled. So how do we account for 100% growth versus 27% or 28% growth? So once again, there is a framing problem. When you're comparing GDP growth, then you're comparing change in a real variable versus change in a nominal variable, which again is not right. We should be comparing a change in the nominal variable, for example, the nominal GDP versus the movement in the markets. So what happens is if you compare the real variable versus the nominal variable, it's easy to say market is growing 4 times as much as GDP. But if you just look at the changes in nominal variable, nominal GDP in the same period grew by approximately 60%, depending on which quarter you take your base as. So then it becomes easier to digest. Then it becomes, okay, fine. Then the stock market has grown almost just double of what you've seen. And that is something which is happening everywhere in the world, not just India. So again, I have more stuff to talk about, but as of now, to start with, I would say my bet is more on that it is definitely not a bubble right now. It is more of an overvaluation, which probably can continue for for some more time. And there is very interesting point regarding this as well. Right before the pandemic, in the first quarter of 2020, and the last quarter of 2019, we had similar concerns that the economy is now receding. It is not growing at the same speed as it was growing earlier. Yet, the stock market is consistently rising. So, do we have a disconnect? We had that problem even before the pandemic arrived.
So, Mr. Kothari, Mr. Bansal, if I understood him correctly, he seems to be of the opinion that it's first of all, it's a framing problem. Real has to be compared with real and nominal has to be compared with nominal. And it seems to be the market could be overvalued, but it's definitely not a bubble. Your reaction, please, Mr. Kothari.
I think carrying on from what Mr. Bansal stated, I think historically, Mr. Bansal, I think the market cap vis-a-vis the GDP is generally in the range of about 75%. If I'm not wrong, it's currently somewhere in excess of 100%. So I would tend to agree with you. Overvaluation, but whether it's a bubble or not, I think I would like to maybe just begin with a relevant anecdote on asset price bubbles. Okay, so the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics in 2013 was split between Professor Eugene Fama and Robert Shiller. Well, it would have been very difficult to find people with more contrasting views than Fama and Shiller to share the prize in the same year. And as you would know, Fama is famous. And since I'm addressing, we've got students as audience out there, this may be of interest to them, that Fama is famous, among other things, for his efficient market hypothesis. On the other side, Robert Shiller was one of the most vocal critics of efficient market hypothesis. And in fact, he went on to author a book called Irrational Exuberance. The difference in the views of these two scholars was also evident in their Nobel lectures, with Shiller presenting the evidence that price changes are a result of, he called it animal spirits actually, or exuberance, and do not incorporate all available information, while in the same event, Fama in his lecture argued that there's no reliable evidence on asset price bubbles and price swings are natural, since rational estimates of expected returns can actually vary as more information continues to become available. So my bending, if I look at these two arguments, I will present some of the things which I think I would rather, I want to stay on the neutral side, whether it's a bubble or it's not a bubble. But yes, I would certainly like to say, yes, maybe overvalued, only given the historical perspective. When we say 75% market cap generally as a 75% of GDP versus what we see it currently. But more relevant, and coming back to the current cycle of COVID, I would like to also quote some recent academic literature in Indian context on whether investor reactions of fear and exuberance are indiscriminate. In fact, Professor J.R. Verma and some of the others from IIM Ahmedabad recently published a paper which studies the market behavior during the first phase of COVID-19 pandemic. Especially, and this research, this paper actually just especially sees whether the investor reaction during the March 2020 crash and the subsequent recovery can be viewed as an initial exuberant or irrational overreaction, followed by a sober assessment, or whether it can be viewed as an efficient market response to an unprecedented shock, followed by other efficient response to fiscal and monetary rescue packages that we saw from the Indian government as well as the global governments all across, and the various measures that were announced by the government during the entire period of pandemic of 1.5 years, and continues to announce so. So this group of professors studying the derivatives market of NSE, particularly the forward-looking volatility information content from the options market, the research concluded that market responded in a calibrated manner to the unfolding of information about the pandemic, supporting the efficient market view, which Professor Fama actually laid out. Markets seem to be performing a fine-grained analysis of each stock, uncertainty and data points which are coming up at each point of time. And even on the days of extreme movement, it was not a wild reaction that was happening across stocks or uninformed stocks. In fact, they have tried to establish that there was movements in stock which was very stock information specific at that point of time. So in fact, if you all see, we've seen the market, it has reacted to certain pharma sector when say pharma related news is coming out, auto sector when the auto sector news is coming out. So with the jury still being out on market efficiency and Nobel laureates themselves not being able to agree whether the bubble exists at all, I find myself quite incapable to say whether we are in one currently or whether we are not. So I would like to maybe at some point we also talk about some of the key points which is leading to some of these increases in the market. But at the moment, I would say I'm quite incapable to say whether we are in a bubble or we are not in one. At the moment, if we look at data points and something to which Mr. Bansal also alluded, yes, overvalued maybe, but overvaluation again is a very historical data reference in comparison to a historical data reference. So I think we'll have to just see how it goes from here.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We will come to, you mentioned a couple of specific things about the equity market, that how both of you mentioned that how investors were reacting to specific information about the companies. We will come to this topic a little later, but let me talk about some macroeconomic issues that could have some impact on the equity market. So going forward from here, and if we go by one of the established tenets of financial theory, that market is forward looking, and if we talk about liquidity that is sloshing around in the market, not just in the market, from the retail investor perspective also, except for last month October, FPI and mutual fund have been putting in tremendous amount of money in the market. Also, the risk appetite, and combine it with the fact that risk appetite among the company, among the bankers, is also quite low. So investment is obviously a problem. And before going into the pandemic, capacity utilization and investment were already slowing down, at least going by the variety of reports that were coming out. If we speak about these kind of indicators, do we think that there will be, and I have already added some sort of disclaimer, this is not going to be advised, but do you think that this kind of, there will be sort of, the correction is warranted because the fundamental, the company valuation have somewhat run ahead of the, the realities of the economy, or this exuberant, although it's a very difficult question that I'm putting in. In fact, Keynes, famously said that markets can remain irrational longer than you can stay solvent. But still, do you think that this kind of run has been justified? Will it, to the best of your, understanding, do you think something like this is likely to continue because the condition at the ground level is still warranting that kind of run? Any comments about that, Mr. Bansal? Then I'll come to you, Mr. Kothari.
Yeah, certainly. So once again, we started the discussion with economic activity and try to look at the disconnect between that and markets. We can actually dissect that disconnect, if we are calling it a disconnect. First is that, as we know that when any investor is buying the stock market, that particular person or entity is not really buying the economy. That person is buying in a simple manner, they're simply buying the company's earnings. So if you look at the growth of earnings, that is closer to economic activity. But if you look at the growth of the stock market, that's where we have the more disconnect. So if you dissect the disconnect between economy and markets, that can be dissected as the relationship between markets and earnings, that is economic activity and earnings versus the stock market. So the major disconnect is right now between earnings and the markets. So if I look at purely the earnings part, then during the pandemic and even in this year, what we've seen is that companies' earnings are falling, not on a year-over-year basis because we have a low base, but broadly they're not growing or somewhere they are falling, but the expenses are falling more, which basically tells us that these large corporates have been able to involve themselves in cost-cutting measures and become more efficient. That is something which we also saw in 2014-15 globally in the oil market crash, that when the going gets tough, then it is really a chance of improving yourself and becoming more efficient. Because as we like to say, it's if you waste a crisis, then it's bad, because a crisis always presents an opportunity. So because of pandemic and the ongoing recovery, we've had a chance as a companies that the companies were able to reduce their expenses more than their revenues, and that is why the bottom line eventually increased. That is why we were able to see good growth in earnings. And somewhere around 2020 end, somewhere around the end of 2020 and beginning of 2021, before the lockdowns of this year, there were expectations that the earnings growth should continue or should improve. However, if we look at the disconnect between the earnings growth and the stock market, it becomes difficult to connect both of them, at least for these 2 years, the calendar year 2020 and 2021. So I think broadly, if we want to look at the stock market and we want to say that there is no rational movement happening there, that would be wrong. There are two important points which I can indicate here. First is that like Mr. Kothari indicated, market cap to GDP ratio, it is certainly very high, but high is a relative term. And at 108% approximately, it is high. It was also high at 90%, and it will probably remain high at 150%. So in markets where we like to call two things, it is bad. It is bad to catch or try to catch a falling knife, but it is equally bad to touch a shooting rocket. So it's the latter part right now, that calling a top of the market at every high is very difficult. As I indicated earlier, in 2019 also, we were trying, markets were also, and experts were also talking about whether the market is actually in irrational movement right now. The second point is the relative movement of Indian market versus the rest of the world. So if you see, out of all the major developed markets, not developed, all the major markets, some couple of weeks back, in fact about 2 months back, India was the third best performing market right after Russia and Australia. That has changed now. If I look at all these markets together, then the only markets which have performed better this year, YTD basis, are the Gulf countries, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and that's obviously because oil prices are going up, so their economy is doing good. Other than these three, we have only Netherlands and Denmark, which have performed better than India. Otherwise, all the other countries' stock market is equally somewhere near to us or somewhere worse than us. And if you look at exuberance, then market cap to GDP ratio is much, much higher in US and in Taiwan. And Taiwan is also a country wherein we have one more similarity, which is the contribution to the stock market from retail investors and domestic investors is extremely high in Taiwan right now, similar to what we've seen in India. So overall, because of the pandemic and the increased inflow of liquidity, we have seen inflows coming both from domestic investors as well as foreign investors. But as I said, because we are somewhere, always nudging with that overvaluation threshold, which is elusive, it is not really there. The growth of flow this year is slower than 2019 and 2020. So that already indicates that market investors have started taking note of this. And even though the net inflow is still there, but it is slower than 2020 and 2019.
Mr. Kothari?
So, in fact, carrying on again from what Mr. Bansal said, so even I would like to basically say yes, for the investors, it is a time to be cautious. In fact, the markets cannot always be a one-side story. It shall have its ups and downs. The markets are dependent upon various factors which are playing out. And typically, when you're coming out of a inflation kind of COVID kind of a scenario and a pandemic kind of a scenario, factors like inflation, government and regulatory policy, interest rates, external environment, the countries around us, the competition around us, global markets, they are all going to play a very, very important factor. However, we also need to understand that a deeper market penetration and spread will also lead to the market's capability to absorb shocks better. And again, going back to what Mr. Bansal also specified, I think retail participation is becoming a very, very important part of our markets. In fact, if I look at some of the factors, if I have to give maybe take a view on why maybe we are experiencing these kinds of market growth, if you look at it, the gradual climb out of pandemic slump. So as per IMF's WEO report, in fact, which came out recently, the Indian economy, which contracted by 7.3% due to the pandemic, is likely to grow by 9.5% in 21 and approximately 8.5% in 22. Whereas same report also talks about US projected to grow at 6% this year and maybe 5.2% next year. China, close to us, around 8% in 21 and 5.6% in 22. So if you look at the global projections for India, also is that India is coming out of this slump in a much better manner. It is expected to continue its growth trajectory. While yesterday's results on inflation and the IIP, etc., was a quarter of quarter, a little bit of a jerk or a slowdown out there. But in the long run, I think the projections are that India is coming out of the pandemic slump in a much better manner. Then you have to also look at IMF forecast for India is a full percent higher than what the World Bank estimate of 8.3% was. Similarly, if you look at on the ground, when you look at the country product, and these things have a bearing on how the market reacts, because the market is looking at how the government is acting, how the reaction is towards growth, how we are building on. As Mr. Bansal also said, you cannot miss a crisis. I think it's important. These are the founding days. We have to also look at the production and progress in vaccination. I think this has been India. It was the major hit was on the small and informal sector of our economy with this pandemic. And with this production and progress in vaccination across the country, the coming back to normal is a very important fuel to our growth, as this sector will contribute largely to support the growth, including the consumption story. The second story that is playing out is growth in manufacturing, and which ideally with the growth in the capital markets or easy access to liquidity through the capital markets, I think should also hope that there's a revival in credit offtake, which is a much requirement, not only during the pandemic, but we've seen a credit offtake cycle, which has been dismally low over the last 8 to 10 years now. I think the next is we have been seeing the strong emergence of the Indian startup ecosystem with the likes of this thing. But I think the most important part is the wider participation of retail investors. In fact, retail investors' participation is leading to a wider spread of investable surplus to capital market ecosystem. Post-pandemic, we saw fresh retail active investors addition of approximately 1 crore in 2020. In the first 2 months of 2021 itself, Indian market has added 45 lakh investors, and the tally currently as at October end numbers, which I have, stands at about 1.445 crores, where there's still about 5 months to go before we close this financial year. We also have to understand what has played to this wider participation. I think technology, where we see apps, online accounts, availability of algos, and importantly, tutorials. In fact, let me tell you, while the retail share of market exposure, retail share in the market exposure has gone up from, I think, 35% 5 years back to about 43 to 45% in this current year, which is a huge jump, which has been something that we as a country had been lacking, the retail participation. In fact, and let me also tell you, because I know the numbers, I will not be able to share the numbers here on this. As a clearing corporation, when we do risk management, we don't only evaluate, we also evaluate what is the kind of risk that sits in the market every day. Let me tell you, this investor is educated. In fact, we see that on an ongoing basis from the kind of product choices that they make. About 5 years back, the retail did not understand the principles of hedges, use of options, etc., to create structures. But what we see now is a protected and hedged portfolio more than ever across the retail portfolio as well. In spite of having a 10 lakh crore open interest in near about 10 lakh crore open interest in futures and options, when we look at the portfolio losses, in case we stress the portfolios out to the extreme levels, it is a minuscule level of losses out there. That means more and more people are adopting to hedged portfolios. Investment in cash market is also now not always naked and is protected by hedges, which is a very good sign for the market. So I think this is one thing that I wanted to maybe bring out, Professor Anand.
It seems that both of you somewhat think that it's, although Mr. Kothari, in the first part of your conversation, you mentioned you are not sure whether it's actually a bubble or overvaluation, but so to say that there are no flashing red lights for you in the sense that there are some factors which seem to warrant such kind of meteoric rise of Nifty and other indices.
In fact, I just want to add, if you see, the market saw one-sided growth over a long period of time over the last couple of quarters and semi-years. But now if you see that growth over a period of time in the last, say, 1 month, we've started seeing the volatility creep in, right?
Yeah.
The market is showing signs of resistance and is reacting to news, but it's reacting to news in a mature manner.
Sure.
You're not seeing one-sided slumps or one-sided rises happen the way we saw over the last 1.5 years.
In fact, FPI have pulled money out in the month of October, and domestic mutual funds have not actually jumped in, which we have been witnessing almost always. Let me move this conversation in slightly different direction to possibly the structural issue. So I have not personally looked at the data, but I came across a couple of articles that if you look at P by E ratio, I mean, going by simple, emphasis there, the Nifty's P by E ratio is basically touching, something like 30, 31. And if you broad bases to 3,000 odd companies that are listed on I'm quoting CMI research. So even overall, if you include the sample of these companies, and even then P by E ratio is touching something like 40. Now, it doesn't seem to be this kind of rally is not confined to certain kind of stocks only. It seems to be slightly broad based in market. Having said that, all of us went through this, pandemic, together, and we witnessed and we read about the terrible things that our country was going through. In fact, across the world, these things were happening. There seemed to be a real distress. Is it fair to say that the financial market are somewhat disconnected with what is happening with large section of the society, and also within the businesses itself? Formal sector has benefited at the expense of informal sector, and therefore to say that the financial market to some extent is a barometer or is indicative of what is actually happening in the economy. So in that sense, do you not think there is at least some disconnect that large number, there have been surveys, there have been reports which say that large number of people have lost job, there's a problem of livelihood, the private consumption has gone down. If you look at RBI's survey, the consumer confidence is also down, and many other surveys have also shown that. So is it fair for us to say, or for people to say, that this exuberance in markets is somewhat disconnected with what is happening with large section of our country? Mr. Bansal, I'll start with you again.
Yeah, sure. So you bring two very interesting points here, Professor Anand. So let me start with the first one, then I'll move to the second one. The first one was when you quoted the P, and there are multiple, you can call them indicators of valuation, like the trailing P, the forward P. You can also look at how many companies are beyond a P like 25 before COVID and after COVID. So there are many indicators, and you pick any of them right now, and you would be able to make a statement like the so-and-so valuation ratio is higher than its long-term average or a 5-year average or a 10-year average by this much percentage. But here's the additional part. The same sentence is also true for other economies. This is happening worldwide. It is just happening more so in India, but that corroborates with the relative resilience of the Indian economy, as Mr. Kothari also mentioned. That we know that we are growing, and our stock market is at very high valuations. But we also have to remember that our growth and our recovery is much better with the developed world, which is still suffering with the Delta variant. And we see that in terms of number of rising cases and the consistent fragmented lockdowns, as we call them, across the economies. Plus, China has seen, even though the number is near to us, but it is significantly lower compared to what they're used to. And the added pressure in China is also the government's crackdown on its tech sector, real estate sector, lately the energy sector as well. And in fact, in the latest the FSR report, Financial Stability Report of Fed also mentioned the concern about the Chinese economy because of this crackdown, indicating that if this continues, then eventually it has the possibility of impacting the global world. When? Obviously, nobody knows, but it is an area of concern. So from the perspective of valuation, as I said, it appears that the market is at very high valuations, but that is justified with our relative resilience relative recovery compared to the rest of the world. I'm only talking about the large economies, both developed and developing. The second part was the disconnect between the formal sector and the informal sector. That's also quite interesting because that's where our structural growth is different from an economy as developed as US. In India, if you look at the entire economy, the economy is not just made up of large corporates. It's made up of large corporate. It's made up of small micro businesses. It is made up of unincorporated sector. It is made up of the households as well, people who just run a single shop or something. In India, the corporate sector is not more than 45% of the Indian economy. While in US, the same number is 75%. In India, in US, the corporate sector is much larger. So if you look at any economy broadly in terms of give and take, it remains a zero-sum game. So if like I quoted previously, the revenues have fallen for the large corporates, but the expenses have fallen more, which means in simple terms, cost cutting. If they're cutting those costs, who is bearing that cost? That in India has been the unincorporated sector, the SME sector. And the reason is because if you look at all these things in terms of numbers, large corporates, a lot of large corporates closed down their shops, closed down their offices because there was no need to place people. They reduced staff wherever necessary. Not all the sectors did it, but a lot of sectors did that. So to conclude this part, the second part, yes, the formal sector has definitely, the large corporate sector has definitely benefited from the informal sector, the unincorporated sector. But this is something which we always see in any recovery. When we are recovering right from the bottom, the larger sector is always going to have more negotiation power, more bargaining power than the unincorporated sector. And vice versa is also true. When the market is actually almost near its top, backed by the economic growth, that's where the unincorporated sector, at least in India, has much more power than the larger sector because everybody leverage is high, everybody is trying to grow, and so on.
Mr. Kothari?
I think, Professor Anand, I don't have much to add from what Nitesh has already put out. And I think I've already alluded to where I think the growth currently is leading to with the kind of penetration, retail penetration, the factors that are playing out. But nothing much more to add beyond what Nitesh pointed
out. Sorry, I was on mute. So, Mr. Kothari, let me start with you on, I'm changing the direction a little bit. So do you think there are some market-related policy or regulatory change, for example, and also the macroeconomic related policy and policy changes? For example, before the pandemic hit, the taxation regime was rationalized, PLI schemes have been introduced. Variety of things this government has been trying to do. Also, the government investment has also gone up. Do you think that these kind of things have also had impact on the market and the valuation in the market? Is there something specific would you like to talk about that it is having a direct impact on the valuation in the market?
No, so Anand, I think I would like to address the regulatory moves in two aspects. Okay, I think since so first, absolutely, as you said, the government policies in the initial phases were in line with a lot with what the global economies and global governments are also actually outlining out there to pump the liquidity into the system, which has its effect. I think we have come out through the pandemic in a big manner. I think the reaction and the policy around vaccination has been a big driver. I think from here, the growth-related aspects, let's see how the subsequent budget, which is out to be there in February. I think now the government response to the entire thing, while RBI is also grappling with the inflationary tendencies which creep in with these kind of measures, and somewhere we are going to see that impact in the monetary policy as we move forward. But on the other side, I think growth is going to remain one of the focus areas from a regulatory policy making perspective. and that may be in terms of what kind of SOPs, etc., because that's going to be what is going to drive us to the growth targets and the GDP targets that we are trying to spell out for ourselves coming out of this slump. But more importantly, what you've not touched, and when since we are talking about the a bubble or an overvaluation, is it out there? Is the dissonance out there? I would also like to talk about some of the things which SEBI as a regulator in capital markets has been doing. And I think it's very important because in such times, in normal times, we don't see a lot of these actions or which don't come to the visibility in the fore because we don't anticipate these kind of falls or explosions of the bubble, etc. But if you look at what SEBI has been doing over the last 2-3 years, in terms of changing the framework of the market to bring in protection for the investor, and when these changes kept coming out one by one, well, you were not able to visualize as to what they are aiming at. But when you look back over the last 2 to 3 years and you put all those changes together, I'll go through them one by one. And it all adds up to how the regulators have been anticipating that the market can be very reactive. And in a reactive market, it's not the institutions, it's not the big players who are always affected, it's always the retail investors which are affected. And typically, when this kind of a phase comes after a long period of serenity, a lot of practices have built into the market, which maybe you need not have raised your eyes on at that point of time, but these become very, very apparent and very, very visible when you are into these type of markets. So if you allow me, I would like to maybe talk about some of the good things which the regulator has been planning for to protect against a possible explosion or a possible correction in the markets that are out there. And mind you, this has been done over the last 3-4 years. So in fact, we should appreciate the regulators to have that thought process into the future. In fact, if you look at it, review of the risk management framework, which was done in June 2020, implemented in June 2020, you can assume this study was going on for almost a year and a half. I was a part of this study on how to change the risk management framework, what to do. And when we implemented in June 2020, we had almost about a year of work that had gone behind it. And this was to ensure a far more smoother margining framework with a little bit of a markup and a built-in protection out there, but smooth tracking rather than jerking reactions to volatility. So this margin framework of 20 years, which was introduced in June 2000, was changed in June 2020. That was one of the key moves that we did. It does not jerk now. Second big change that the market did, there was a lot of resistance to this, but we have to understand that over a long period of serenity, what happens is a lot of leverage practices, a lot of liquidity practices build up into the market. We had situations where I needed to put 1,000 rupees, somebody else was willing to put 10,000 rupees and give me intraday leverage. But that is what fuels a lot of bubble and a lot of volumes out there. But then is it safe? Maybe not, because a market may react intraday to certain news where that 10 times leverage or 15 times leverage on an already leveraged futures and options market is a dangerous phenomenon which a retail investor does not understand. SEBI came up with this upfront margin rules where it said, brokers, you cannot trade beyond the margins or you cannot give leverage beyond the margins which the client has actually provided to you. And how do you monitor that? They said, stock exchanges and clearing corporations, you go and monitoring starting intraday during the day to check where the utilizations are and let the broker be accountable for it. We've seen those leverage practices come down, or leverage practices that are out there are more regulated and governed. And in this garb of competition of leverage, there's a broker who has deep pockets. Yes, he can provide leverage, but there's a broker who needs to compete but does not have leverage. That's where practices come into which can be dangerous for investors. Well, that has gone out. That has been one big major change. Second thing we saw was the way the collaterals was provided by the investors was a very, very unsafe mechanism earlier. If I had to give my shares as collateral, I had to transfer it to your Anand, your account, and maybe you in turn had to transfer it to Mr. Bansal's account. I had no ownership of those shares. I had no control over their shares. Once they had moved out of my Demat account, and SEBI said nothing doing. Come to pledge repledge. Pledge repledge was not a legal phenomenon which was existing in the market. SEBI went ahead, talked to the government. They created that framework which allowed pledge over pledge. And now an investor has the shares sitting in his own account, in the safe vicinity of his own account. and still he can trade with using those shares as collaterals. And now SEBI is also looking at announcement, and again, T+1 settlement. While there's been a lot of jury out there on T+1 settlement, very honestly, what it does to the investor is rather than carrying a 2 days of market risk, he's ending up carrying 1 day of market risk. So I think some of these regulatory changes which have been there, they are not overnight changes. They have been in the works for year, 2 years, 3 years. And when you put all of them together and the way they've come together, I think it is overall, I think it's the foresightedness. It makes the market smoother. Yes, I don't know whether it's a bubble out there or it's out there to explore, whether it's an overvaluation, it's a right valuation. But I think in the background, the regulators, in anticipation of something that might happen, are making these markets much more safer for us as we go forward. And I keep telling people, well, these kind of changes, yes, they do bring in pain in the short run. But in the long run, whenever we've had these kind of changes happen in the ecosystem and the market infrastructure space, it makes market much more bouncy and much more safer for our future. So I don't know whether we are in a bubble, but if we talk from a perspective of the MIIs and the regulator, I think we are trying to gear up to manage the risk in a far better manner as compared to where we were, say, 5 years prior to today. So,
I do agree with you, Mr. Kothari, that as far as transactional frictions are concerned and stock lending is concerned and leveraged investments are concerned, I do agree that SEBI has done some stellar work in that. Mr. Bansal, you have been a derivative trader. Do you have any comments to make about the transaction friction and the other aspects of hedging and what SEBI has done on any other entity that has done, which has, if obviously it will not be the factor which is fueling the growth in the market, but it still basically makes things a little easier for people to participate and invest. Any comments on that?
Not significant comments. Mr. Kothari is a much better expert at regulation than I am. But I would like to re-emphasize something which he has already said. And this is something which comes in conversation when I'm talking to colleagues or when I'm talking to friends in India, outside India. That almost, Mr. Kothari mentioned that over a period of 2 to 3 years, we've had so many regulations. I would take the liberty of saying that almost every 3 months, there is something, even if no regulation taking effect in 3 months' time, but there is some improvement almost on an average in a 3 months period, that either a new regulation is being announced or a new regulation comes into effect or a new regulation is being talked about. T+1, for example, has been, is being talked about for a long time now already. And hopefully in next couple of months, we get a closure on that. But I think all of these policies taken together provide a safer environment, not just to one class of investor, but all investors taken together. So I think what has happened in the last couple of years definitely provides that that environment. And obviously, there is always more work to do, but it definitely tells us that it is taking us in the right direction.
Sorry, again, I was on the mute. I should take some questions because I have a few very interesting questions that have come in. Let me take a question that Mr. Amlan, Professor Amlan has already pasted there. Let me read it out to both of you. The history of asset price bubble is also a history of financial innovation. Call and put options were invented in the Great Tulip Bubble in Netherlands. The 2008 crash would also not be possible without the innovation of securitization of the subprime market. Are you worried about the impact of financial innovations on the overheating of the market? Mr. Bansal, you can begin, please, if you have any comments.
Overheating, impact of inflation. Can you repeat that? Impact of?
Are you worried about the impact of financial innovations on the overheating of the market?
Oh, okay.
This is in the context of that house.
Apart from knowing that somewhere. Go on.
Please go ahead. I think there's a little bit of lag. That's why we are interrupting you. So please go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's some lag. All right. So what I was saying was that interestingly, we do have not just a connect between financial innovation and either a bubble or a crash. We also have something interesting, which is that every single time, if you look at last couple of crashes in the last, let's say, couple of decades, each crash has been different from the immediately previous crash and maybe last couple of crashes. This is something very different from the way it used to happen in the post World War II world, for the maybe 1950s to 1970s era in the global world, wherein even though they were partial crashes, they were related to economic activity much more than they were related to financial innovation or the problems such as high liquidity, credit growth, etc., etc. So I do think that there is some connect, but I think that is coincidental rather than we should not be looking into that as a cause and effect relationship, that a financial innovation will sooner result into some kind of a market impact. We can actually look at it in the other direction. As I said, no crisis should be wasted. Somewhere, I think, when the concept of cryptocurrency started, it happened right after the GFC, the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008. I'm not saying that that is the direct impact, but it creates the psychological base after which somebody, at least somebody in the world, is able to think about everything from scratch and say, what can I do better? How can I do something existing in a better way? So I think it's actually the reverse, that a crash creates the crisis creates the opportunity, it opens up minds, and it causes the next leg of innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Bansal. Mr. Kothari, any comments? Crash creates the crisis and crisis creates the opportunity. Could there be some causes for the crash as well?
No, so I would like to put it very simply. I think Professor Amlan mentioned that, well, one of the crises led to the creation of options. I would too, when I look at the market volumes currently and the product divide currently, I would say that this type of crisis led to an adoption of those options, right? So while somebody created options at some point of time, but the way our market has seen adoption of options, and when I say adoption of options, it's not only about pure call writing or naked call writing, etc. I think we've seen people, and when I say people, I'm talking about sophisticated investors or institutional players. In fact, retail guys discussing condors, they're discussing triangles, discussing covered calls, etc., which is a healthy sign. I think that big innovation has been that people are going towards education. I would also like to bring out, I think one big innovative change that this crisis has brought about is the bend of automated online-based trading, mobile-based trading. In fact, if I see some of the numbers, non-electronic or non-digital trading in our market has come down to less than 20% today as a market share. The adoption of electronic trading and digital form of trading through apps, through smart apps, etc., or algos or co-locations is now around 80%, which is a big adoption. What this is setting up as a platform is for the, I would say, the rocket start of the future growth of the capital markets. Historically, if you look at globally, the earning which was getting diverted to capital markets was far, far lower in our country. I think, if I'm not wrong about the numbers, these may be dated, but they were somewhere around 2.5 to 3%, which used to actually go to the capital markets, which I'm told has significantly started showing an uptrend now. I think that uptrend is because you can just log into your mobile, go onto an app and you want to buy it. And most of the advertisements also on the television now are about it, right? So that penetration is far, far higher. I think that has been one of the big innovation adoptions that has happened out of this crisis, in my view.
I agree with you. In fact, you mentioned irrational exuberance by Mr. Schiller, and I remember a graph in the book where the graph was so astounding that at the advent of internet, the number of transactions, the frequency of transaction, the way it went up, it was humongous. I agree with you there. And also about the securitization. Of course, securitization was one of the factors in 2008 crisis, but securitization is something that is very useful as well. So this kind of financial innovation is, I think, at least being somewhat interested in financial markets, quite useful. Mr. Kothari, I have a question for you from the audience. I'm going to read it out. You mentioned the retail investor these days are more informed as most of them have covered exposures. But is it possible that they are less informed about the fundamentals of the stocks they invest in, given the filings and disclosures are getting bulkier and less informative? Example, 500-page offer document of Paytm.
Absolutely possible. Because while I say that they're adopting to a lot of these innovative structures, etc., They are more of price information and price plays and mathematical plays rather than information plays. Very much possible. And very honestly, yes, I have seen my son and his friends also looking at markets as a mathematical modeling rather than a fundamental and an analytical modeling. So I think somewhere, yes, this trend, what the question that is there is a very, very true trend that is out there.
In fact, next semester I was planning to offer a course on technical investment, and because after finally I gave in that, maybe I should talk about that also, because most students seem to be so attracted with this thing. Anyway, I will. There's another question. Even if overall market is not in a bubble, what's your opinion about new IPOs, which are mostly earning negative and burning cash? I mean, at least in one segment of IPOs. Unprecedented valuation, but justified by valuation multiples. I will start with you, Mr. Bansal. Any comments about Nykaa, Zomato, and Paytm? Any comments about them?
I think, in my opinion, it's normal. Whenever any market in the world sees high valuations, it is actually a good avenue. It creates a good avenue for people who are still, not listed to come out with their IPO and start listing shares. So personally, I do not see any problems as such in a flurry of IPOs. In fact, this is one of the reasons. This is one additional reason why we have seen foreign funds coming in India and investing directly in these IPOs. That was not something which used to happen before GFC, when these foreign investors used to directly pump in money in an IPO. So I think in terms of the trend, it's fine, it's normal. Commenting on whether the valuations themselves are justified, that is again that is something which which is anyone's guess. There are a lot of examples, both in India, outside India, wherein valuations were stellar right when the company got listed and on its debut day, and then maybe the company still exists and the valuation has never been reached again, ever. So there have been many cases like that. So I think that the best judge for that is the market itself, wherein market somewhere is able to connect the company's earning, that particular company's earnings and future earnings with the market prices. But yeah, as far as the trend is there of IPOs, I think there is nothing wrong with that. If market continues with the same valuation, if you look at the current year, the best return I think was in the month of August 2021. And since then, if you see, broadly, we've grown by, in terms of stock market prices, just by 1% a month, which somewhere indicates that all investors classes, domestic as well as foreign, are getting cautious, because market broadly is just sticking there. At the current prices, 1% in Nifty is approximately 150 or 200 odd points move, which is significant in absolute terms, but not that significant in relative terms. So as long as, to conclude from my side, the flurry of IPOs is there, I think there's nothing wrong with that. Valuation is anyone's guess.
So, Mr. Kothari, so much money is being raised through IPO. Obviously, this has to be opportunistic. Any company would like to, benefit from the uptick in the market. But any thoughts on that? Is there any predatory behavior on the part of, these VC-funded companies, and they are burning cash and stellar valuation that we are seeing? Any comments on that?
Professor Anand, I cannot maybe give a view on that
Sure.
side. But one thing for sure that I would like to say, I wouldn't like to comment whether those valuations are high or they're not.
Sure.
But what I see is, what this is doing is, this is fueling an innovative entrepreneurship in the back, right? Because obviously such things do not go unnoticed. And I would like to see the positive side of it. While yes, there's a negative, because there are investors also which are going to get caught into this. Absolutely. But it depends upon whether it's predatory, whether it's high or whether it's not. But certainly what is coming up is that innovative entrepreneurship is finding its bearing in the country. I think we've already, in India it's happening now, but we've seen this happening in the West for quite some time, where people have gone public, right? With similar models of revenue. And they have continued to grow, and their valuations have continued to grow. So we'll have to just wait and see over here.
Sure. There are a couple of other questions before I ask the other question. We have not talked about the bond market and the debt market till now. I mean, as part of financial markets, what has been happening in the the debt market and the bond market during the pandemic. If you could, let us know, let our audience know a bit on that. Or people who have been attending our this GFC, several speakers have commented on the fact that in order to grow infrastructure, the bond market, and the not just the AAA bonds, but also different kinds, differently rated bonds should also find a market. And therefore, it's the government. It's upon government to actually invest money in infrastructural activities. But is it sustainable that government keeps investing money or creates DFIs and various other mechanisms that needs to be created in order to fund infrastructure? So what has been happening in the bond market, and going forward, the important part of our economy, that is infrastructure investment and capital investment, if the bond market remains the way it is, do you think that it will have some sort of negative impact on the growth, or it will create some sort of ceiling on the growth that the economy can experience? Mr. Bansal, I'll start with you. Any comments on that?
Yeah, yes. I think bond market is definitely an area where we are not improving as an economy as much as we should compared to what we're doing in equities. Couple of important points regarding that. So first of all, if you look at right after the pandemic, the foreign flows into equities started somewhere mostly net positive from the month of May 2022. Right before that, obviously because of pandemic, flows were consistently negative, which was also the case for debt investments. But after May 2022, we've seen consistently net positive flows from foreign investors in equities, but we haven't seen that for debt. And there are structural reasons for that. But I think whenever it is about debt market of any country, including all types of debt, government debt, corporate debt, I think the primary instrument there is the growth of the government debt market itself, wherein we have some very important changes which the RBI has done, which the government has done, wherein it's possible now to do retail trading of government debt as easily as the equities. The second trend in debt globally, at least in US, is that, and that's recently, this is a new trend, that while electronic trading in equities across the world has started much earlier, it's at least a 20-25 years minimum phenomena, but electronic trading was not something which was possible that easily in debt market, both government debt as well as corporate debt. And what we have seen in US is that has been used as an opportunity. The current crisis has been used as an opportunity to improve the share of electronic bond trading in the US, typically mostly for corporate bonds. Government debt is consistently improving already. But because our government debt market is not as liquid and as improved already, this is where somewhere we are lacking. So I think this is one area wherein we have a lot of room to improve. And the moment we do that, I think the quote that Mumbai and Delhi as the financial centers of the world's financial capital, it's not going to be that far. As of now, we are not a typical contender for that, purely because of this kind of flow is not as easy. The moment we approach that, it is going to be a lot easier.
Mr. Kothari, what should we do to deepen our debt market or bond market? Government, debt market is definitely.
Professor Anand, that has been a question out there, which the regulators and the government has been delving on in a big way. But it's very important because this is not a topic which we can give away so easily. Because today, if you look at it, majority of our industrial growth and credit offtake is driven by bank lending. Somewhere corporate bonds have to become an instrument of choice, but that will require a vibrant secondary market and liquidity to be available to make it vibrant enough. So while there have been multiple steps that the regulators have been taking, but still there are discussions on in this, I think one big factor change that they made was about limitations of the number of ISNs that can be issued in a period of time. And more than that, I think if we are to look at the liquidity driving parameters for the secondary market, one important need that has been felt is a requirement of a repo market that is out there for a corporate bond. A repo becomes a very important element because that allows easy raising of liquidity if you've got a bond in your portfolio, which may even be an HTM for all you know. And that is where, while the exchanges were allowed to launch repo products, there were flaws around it. And it is, I think, about 6 months back where permissions were given. In fact, SEBI permissions were allowed for setup of a separate limited purpose clearing corporation only for the purpose of allowing repo transactions in corporate bonds. And this was for the first time where it was said that this limited purpose clearing corporation is going to be co-owned by the mutual funds because they are the biggest participants on the repo market. It was said that it will be co-owned by the mutual funds. And how do you raise security fund or a settlement guarantee fund in that, where any new issuances was required to be actually a percent or a basis point of that was to be contributed. So I think there have been some remarkable issues. Then we saw the introduction of the RFQ platform, the request for quote platform on the corporate bonds. And then regulations were that every mutual fund was required to post minimum 10% of its secondary market volumes through the RFQ. And we have seen liquidity grow up in the RFQ platform. And I think now the recent regulations have been changed or they're yet to change, I think was to make it higher to about 20 or 25%. So I think somewhere the regulators are intending to bring the corporate bonds more from an OTC kind of a structure, bilateral kind of structure, to a more liquid and transparent platforms like the stock exchanges and the RFQs, etc. On the other side, creating a vibrant platform for repos, buybacks, etc. On the other side, providing enough safety and enough independence and transparent professional structure to that infrastructure. I think this is the way to go. Yes, but a lot of debate is still to go on this. I think a lot of miles to cross. But certainly, yes, this is something that is on top of the radar for the regulators and the government, as well as the stock exchanges and the other MIs, is what I can say.
So this is something that I'm not much aware of, and since both of you are practitioner and senior practitioner in the industry, is there something afoot in terms of credit enhancements? Is there some movement? I read a RBI report on credit default swap and some other instruments. Is there something happening? Because my understanding in this area is not very deep, but I think this could also be a one factor in deepening of the bond market in terms of credit enhancement. So, Mr. Kothari, any movement on that area?
No, so not in the recent past. So no, again, my understanding also of this area is a pretty low. But yes, there have been on times discussions about whether swaps as a product can be brought onto the exchanges, transparent structure, etc. But very honestly, not much that I've heard of on that front.
Mr. Bansal, do you have something to add to what I just asked? Is it?
Similar comments there.
Yeah. All right. So I have another question.
Nothing new that I've heard.
Okay. So there's one question from the audience. Could the high equity valuation be justified by reduced discount rate attributable to higher confidence of global investors, especially PE, hedge funds, etc., in Indian markets, leading to a lower perceived risk? Should I repeat the question? Could the high equity valuations be justified by reduced discount rate attributable to higher confidence of global investors in Indian markets, leading to a lower perceived risk? Do you think that a foreign institution are attributing lower discount rate to Indian assets, financial assets, especially? Mr. Bansal, we can start.
Sure. I think there is definitely some contribution of valuations that can be attributed to this, but not significantly. So there are two parts to it. First is that when interest rates drop, apparently from a fundamental perspective, from a theoretical perspective, valuations can be quite attractive because the discount rate has gone down. But you can always find out why the discount rate has gone down, because obviously apparently the foreign interest rates have gone down, or maybe the Indian interest rates have gone down. In the current situation, if the interest rates in the US or in Europe go down, that will cause the discount rate for India as well to drop, because apparently dropping the interest rate means higher liquidity. Higher liquidity in foreign flows, if that results into foreign inflows of money into India, that actually is the glue between the drop in the interest rate and the increase or potential increase in stock. By itself, only if the rates are dropping, but this glue doesn't stick. For some reason, let's say maybe for a structural reason, if FIIs, FPIs do not believe that the money should be invested to India, maybe better avenues are available in a country like China or Vietnam or Sri Lanka, then the money would still flow, but it would not be coming to India. So that's one part which has been, at least till the middle of this calendar year, been there. That is, rates were low and the foreign confidence in India was also high. What has changed in the last 3 months is that there are talks of coming out of that deep liquidity situation. The Fed is going to start taper pretty soon, and the confidence of foreign investors has reduced. It is not negative, it is reduced, because of which we are seeing reduced flow of foreign money in India. So both of those things have started, which basically indicates that foreign investors are cautious. That's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that if only if only the reduced rates was the only catalyst here, then ideally stock markets should not grow when the rates are going higher. That is not the case. If you pick up any graph and you look at the movement of stock market with the with any kind of interest rate, you would see that a lot of times when the interest rates are growing, the stock market is also growing. That actually is an acceptance of the fact that if interest rates are growing, that means the economy is growing, and that is being indicate part of the story. They cannot be called as the major contributor of high valuations at any time.
Mr. Kothari, any comments on that?
Nothing to add from my side on this.
So CMI's latest data, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Bansal, FPIs have been pulling out money because there is inflation going up in USA, and therefore hardening of interest rate. The money is flowing out. It's not very something to be alarmed about. But one thing is very curious. I have only a couple of minutes. That what's happening right now, because of which even domestic mutual funds are not. Generally, I've seen that whenever FPI sell mutual funds, domestic mutual funds purchase. I mean, mostly, not always. But this time around, we don't see that. Any specific reason for that? Is something happening at the ground which I'm not able to catch?
Could you repeat the last part?
Is there anything specific happening at the ground level where you are, and that I'm not able to understand as to why this is happening, why mutual funds are not in the market right now?
Okay, so I think nothing particularly about mutual funds, because I am not aware of that data myself. But to me, the major area of concern is this. If you look at the foreign flows of money, both FII and FPI, FPI mentioned that in October they went negative. In November also, if I look at the running data, it is still negative. And we are not even in the middle of the month. So the FPI numbers for the current calendar year are still positive. But if the same thing continues for 2 more months, November and December, then probably FPI net flows would become very close to zero. FIIs already are fiddling with that number. So my particular concern is that it is only the domestic investors which are holding this rope right now. And as I said, whenever valuations start getting higher, this is a typical reaction that we see, that FIIs start allocating their money to more defensive sectors. It could be bonds, could be anything else, but it's only been a couple of months, and a couple of months cannot be called a trend. So we have to see that data for a couple of more months to make a trend out of it. And if that continues, then that causes an important concern.
Mr. Kothari, any last comments on this?
So again, I'm not aware about the facts on the ground, but as they said, yes, FPI trends have been negative, and even domestic mutual funds have not been big buyers, which was earlier in the past. The factors for that maybe they depend upon the retail investor deposits or retail investor buys flows as well, right? But again, Anand, I'm not an expert on that and have not been analyzing that area.
Sure. So I think that's all the time we have, and it was really wonderful having both of you. I understand that both of you lead a very, very busy life, and even on Saturday you took some time out to speak to us. I'm very grateful to you, and we hope to speak with you again in some way or the other, with students and faculty member, because I think it's a very, very important exercise that practitioners such as you speak to students also. This is also sort of a capital investment that we make in students. So I'm very, very grateful that you came over and found some time for us.